Hey, how's it going? Simple Lines Anatomy, indulge, as usual. So, this one, we had one of our followers basically see a previous video and say, hey, I work on what is the equivalent of an assembly line, and I'm looking down and forward always. Should I quit my job? Is this a giant problem? Will I inevitably collapse and fall to pieces? And the answer is no, not really. But there are some really basic things that can be a problem in this position that we're going to try and explain as best we can, and really how to prevent some of the issues with it. So we're going to go over a few different things. A lot of it will have to do with the sacrum and the pelvis, because that seems to be kind of the pinch point, if you will, kind of the problem area. So first and foremost, the reader was definitely right. As you work on, it doesn't matter what, you could be working in a kitchen, you could be working on an assembly line, you are in a hunched, rounded position, a position of flexion. We call that flexion, this round through here, flexion. So we're looking down, and your head is relatively forward, and so your spine is pretty much on a stretch. You've got this muscular stretch all through here, and you're loading the front of your spine, the intervertebral discs and the vertebral bodies. Let's not get too deep into that, but you're loading your body, and this is not a problem in and of itself. You can do this for a very long time. One very important thing that you must eventually do is go back up straight, and you should always consider strengthening exercise. If you're going to spend all day down and forward like that, you should try and exercise in such a way that reverses that, or spend parts of the day at the end of the day reversing that, being in the opposite position. So one of the things that eventually starts to happen with this position is that the sacrum, this triangular-like bone at the bottom of the spine, gets pushed into a bit of an awkward position, and it's a compounding motion. It's a few different motions that happen. So looking at this here, looking at how this tends to curve out and backwards, if we look at the pelvis sacrum from the side, so this blue thing right here, that's the sacrum kind of highlighted. In between what we call the ilium, or innominate is the more technical term, because the ilium is just one part of the bone here, this upper part of the bone. But we're more interested in how the one moves on each other. So this is the ilium and sacrum from the back. There's the sacroiliac joints, therefore. And so what happens when you start to flex the spine? So what ends up happening is you've got a spine that's normally shaped like that. We call that an extension position. But what happens over time is that as you bend forward, as you're doing this with the spine, it will be reversed in curvature. It will start to go like this. Really, it'll be flat. I could certainly draw it like that, but that's not real. So it'll be more of a flat position. So right about there. And through the magic of technology, ooh, look, I can shift that sacrum around. There we go. So the sacrum will start to go flatter as well. So it won't be just the spine that moves. It won't be just that spine that gets into that position. The sacrum will be carried along with it. And this is quite simply because they share ligaments. There's anterior longitudinal ligament, ooh, that was great, posterior longitudinal ligament, and then of course there are the spinous process in between, and to say the least there's a supraspinous, interspinous, that kind of thing. That's, again, good enough for technicalities. So it tends to drift backwards with that pressure. It tends to come backwards into what we call counternutation, CN. There we go, counternutation. And again, that's not a huge problem. We're not there yet on issues. But over time, and with compounding extra motions, this is an issue. So really, really easy. Again, just to review. That's going like that. So that sacrum bone, which we'll do in pink here, love pink, great color, will go flat. It will go backwards because it's connected to the whole body. It's connected to the whole body, and it goes along with these motions here. Very, very simple. Okay, so we've got that sacrum. It's reversing in direction. Real simple. And now, this is where it gets a little more complicated, not too complicated. So when you're in the hunched forward position, so this person is working, they've got that rounded flex spine. It's basically doing, this is more of like a posterior shot, a back shot, but it's doing essentially this. what you have to understand, when the sacrum is pressed back and hard like that, when the spine is curved, we start isolating motions. So to look at the sacrum, now this is the same bones here. This is a sacrum and anonymous. This is a sacrum and ilia here, just like done in a cross-sectional view. So it's kind of just like we did a straight cross like that, and we put it right here. So this is the sacrum, and that's the ilium on either side. So what happens is this sacral bone, simplified, will shift backwards. That's the counter nutation kind of happening there. It shifts backwards, and there's just a little bit of a lip. We haven't exaggerated here, but there's just a little bit of a lip right about there to hold it, and there's ligaments as well going in between those structures. So there's going to be something reinforcing it. So it's not just going to go, into outer space or something, but it will go backwards. Now it really stops moving at this point. Now it's kind of stuck. You bottom out the ligaments. It's got only a few millimeters of posterior movement. Anyways, it's only got a few millimeters backwards movement, but now it's bottomed out. So it's an unmoving structure, which is a problem. Because if it is normally meant to move, that means when it stops moving, something else must take on that movement. And so the next thing in the chain is the L5-S1 vertebrae. I can do a better job than that. Hey, you know what? I got a square tool. Why don't we use that? There we go. Hey, there's a square. Cool. All right. So what starts to happen is now that this is backwards, it's bottomed out into a posterior position. Its ligaments are on quite a bit of strain. They are loaded out, that posterior sacroiliac ligament. All of the motions in this area are concentrated here. So any of the movements coming through the body are concentrated. Now, here's the thing. If you only stayed fixed in one position, like this, just looking down, you'd probably be completely fine. 20 years, not great. You'd be pretty hunched over. But, eventually would get up. The problem starts to happen when we, instead of that, we do this. We turn to the side. That gets to be a problem. So when we turn to the side, something else starts to happen. So remember, this sacrum is back. It's bottomed out. L5 is now the moving part. L5 on S1. So that's 5 on 1 here. And what happens is when we start turning, so this guy's turned this way. Clark, did you have to do laundry right now? Oh, you did. Okay. Anyways, so when this guy starts turning this way, vertical axis, all of the forces are basically concentrated to the one area. So it's quite a bit of torque happening on this L5-S1 vertebrae. And normally, where the sacrum would take on some of that load, where the sacrum would be able to shift a little bit, and even further than that, the hips, we'll get to that in a minute, the hips would shift, the whole pelvis would move. It's all the L5-S1 articulation, torquing, twisting in between. It's got some reinforcing ligaments. It's got some muscles around it to help, but it can only take so much. Ugh. A lot of force. And it is the entire upper body weight basically concentrating into that one spot. It's like a funnel, a doom spiral into this area here. It's not good. It's really, really not good. It's not designed. This L5-S1 articulation is really not designed to take on that load. And you could say even more that the disc probably isn't meant to take on that load over time, especially. This is not just a one-time thing, of course. Over time, it's not meant to take on that load. So we've got to do something about this, right? Because this is actually not a complicated thing. This is easily fixable. So I'll ask a simple question. Let you think about it for one split second before I start talking again, because I love my own voice. What can we do to make it so that this L5-S1 area has more helping it move? If it's going to be rotating, whether it's left or right, whatever direction we're going, what can we do so that there's other contributors to movement? And it's a really simple thing. What are the next things in the line? And the next things in the line are really, really easy. One is just the pelvis as a whole, because that can do a decent spin. But the other one is the hips and the legs. So the hips here, those are the coxofemoral joints to get technical. And then we've got the legs as well. So if you're working on an assembly line, and you're turning left and right because you got your tools and there's a screwdriver, or you've got, I don't know, you're working in the kitchen, you've got plates and tools, and I don't know, you're chopping rutabagas. I don't know what they look like, but rutabagas. There we go. You're going back and forth. You're doing this twisting, hunched over movement. One simple thing you can do is just lead with the leg. Really, really easy. So these are 2 feet, and it's quite an easy thing to do. So if we are turning this way, we're turning to the right. Make sure before you turn, you just turn that foot out first. Your first thing you do is turn your foot in the direction. So you point it that way. And if it's pointed that way, then you can much more safely step in that direction. So you can step out with it, and you open up the movement of the pelvis. That way the pelvis goes with it. The pelvis points that way now, and you can move your whole body with that movement. And this seems like nothing. It seems like something simple. It seems like it won't do anything, but the reality is this person who's working on the line, this person who's going back and forth and back and forth, every single day, few thousand times realistically, back and forth all day, twisting and turning, whether it's a kitchen or a line or some kind of an assembly job, they're saving themselves a ton of isolated strain on the body. They're saving themselves from wearing down this particular joint here, because that's just how we're kind of put together. And it's unfortunate that these manual labor jobs tend to do that, but it's actually a relatively easy thing to compensate for. It's an easy thing to make much better. And so, hopefully, the person who asked us to cover this will be able to do that. Again, we've been Simple Lines Anatomy. We got some of that social media stuff. We've also got an app too. Quite recently we made a decision that it will just turn into a sound effect device. It won't be anatomy and pictures and quiz questions. We're just going to kind of like make weird noises and turn that into an app. Probably a lot more money in it.